Whiskeyjack Nixigasun, Nixikapornikotiniya from South Lake, Alberta. I'm a child of an Indian residential school survivor. I didn't live with my mom permanently until I was about 9, 10 years old. I was in child care. I was in foster homes and stayed with extended family as well. Having that kind of unstable beginning in my life created, I guess, a lot of isolation from who I was as a person. Nehio Esquel, a Cree woman. Seeing your mom in such a wounded place, I guess, created some resentment, especially when I didn't grow up with her. And I left home very confused and feeling a lot of resentment towards my mother. It wasn't until I worked in a museum and I heard these voices of survivors. And there was this one voice that said, I didn't teach my children my language because I didn't want them to have the same treatment I had for speaking my language. And so it was then I realized how much residential school affected my mother and how that in turn affected her relationship to me as her daughter. One of the homes I did live in was my grandmother's home. She created the foundation of who I am because she's the one who told me who I was, that I was Nehio as well. I was strong, I was loved, I was smart, and all of those wonderful affirmation every child needs when they're growing up. And when I lived with my grandmother, being in those circles with these older people speaking the language and hearing them laugh, feeling their love, there was a beautiful energy being in that circle that really connected me to them. It's always something I really want to speak. I know it's in me, and I want to be able to speak Squenehiawe and speak Cree. I moved a lot to go to school everywhere. And before I would leave home, my grandmother did 3 things. She gave me a blanket, she gave me sweetgrass, and she told me, my girl, never forget where you come from. And I didn't, because I'd always call home, right? I would tell her what I'm learning, and I would get her to speak Cree with me. And when I'm learning the language, that is definitely part of coming into my voice. That hole that was in my heart for so long is being filled with language and culture and connection to that generation that still carries the language and the knowledge. The other thing that really helped me heal is the whole being that I didn't talk, I didn't express myself. There was a way that I did, and that was through art.
One of the things I do is when I'm playing with the clay and I start, sculpting, it's like something comes out of them, like it's always faces, and I have conversations with them. But it's almost like they start telling me a story.
This piece is called Losing My Talk, and it was inspired by my uncle. He was a very brilliant man, but he lived a lot on the streets and had a very hard life. And being that he was the oldest male in my mother's brothers, he learned a lot of the traditions from my great-grandfather who held the ceremonies underground when it was outlawed. When he went to residential school, of course, they weren't allowed to speak Cree, and in the mouth there's a bit of the syllabics, Cree syllabics. So on the side I have the tree, which is the tree of life, but it's also, the tree is very important to a lot of our ceremonies. Here again, losing that connection with the closeness of our parents' love. So I have a mother and child. I left the eyes so that they're almost hollow because we lost so much of our sight when we give in to our addiction. And so not only do I have the ceremonial part, but I have the residential school, how they Christianized, put Christianity so much into our children's brains. What he learned so much in residential school, he didn't use. It didn't make him a better Canadian. It didn't make him a civilized. So all of this policy of assimilation didn't work because he died from poisoning himself with alcohol to hide that pain. So that was my tribute to him. After I fired the piece and I brought it home to kind of just sit with it and see what I wanted to say with it, like I knew that it was a teaching piece because I was really exploring Indian residential school and intergenerational trauma. I started actually making it look very flesh tone skin, but it wasn't really working for me. So I started layering it with gold because he inherited a lot of knowledge from my Chopon, my grandfather. And to me, it was like he had gold. He had this rich abundance of knowledge and history and songs and all of this amazing gifts to give, especially to us younger generation, the next generation who doesn't know our language, who questioned who are we, where do we come from, what's our stories, what's our songs, what's our attachment to the land. Why are we here? Like those big questions we have as we get older. Stories that would help us to understand who we are and where we come from and what we need to do to get to where we're going. So that's kind of the reason around the coloring. Another feature I add to this is that I put some horsehair and, of course, a little gold brass. Because my family, we are known for our connection to horses. A lot of the men in my family have trained horses, worked with horses. They got into the rodeo circuit, truck wagons. Many of them are still in it. And because my uncle went to residential school, I wanted to also show one of the ways they dehumanized children in residential school was to cut their hair. Hair is just one way of expressing who you are. Recently, I cut my own hair, and it's part of mourning, going through a lot in my life, a lot of changes. I felt the need to cut my hair in order to grieve for who I was and the people I've lost and the relationships I've lost, to let go of the hurt, the pain, and to start over again. In this case, the chopping of their hair was getting rid of who you are in the most, getting rid of the Indian in the child, getting rid of your Indianness, getting rid of your spirit.
So the last time we talked, my commitment to the language was really important. And the best way for me with learning the language was through the syllabic chart because it's visual. Well, to me, it's very artistic. And it's all about the sounds. So if I were to say Nigawi, which is my mother, that would be Ni, Ka, and then I would add a little dot to the side of that with a W for we. This piece of wood is from the Blue Quills Indian Residential School. It was one of the pieces of wood that I saw discarded when they were doing some work in the school. So I took it. It was behind a chalkboard. And so I used it as the base, and it does look like a coffin. And again, that connection to the school. That school built him, educated him, but also destroyed him in so many ways, especially his spirit. I did my uncle's eulogy at his funeral, and I worked on it, of course, the night before, and I met a lot of people from Edmonton and Vancouver, where he lived in Skid Row. I heard a lot of stories, and one of the nicknames for my late Uncle George was High Tower. The St. Paul story was he was really drunk, and there's a tower, the cable or satellite tower in St. Paul, and it looks like, drums. The satellite, they look like drums, so he was really intoxicated. He climbed all the way up there because he wanted to go sing and play the drum. Of course, cops were called. They chased him up there, and he pissed on them. He peed on them. So, and my auntie, one of my aunties was there, and she was trying to go in and help get him down, but he did his own thing. He eventually came down, of course, was sent to jail. One of the other things I want to attach is this little bag. This represents his bundle that he carried within him to keep him alive and to help him on his journey afterlife as well. And so that's going to be placed here. I'm still kind of wondering if I'm going to put it on the side or around his neck, kind of as his protection. And I also wanted to offer some tobacco to him, wishing that I would have asked him more questions when he was alive, and wishing I could have learned more about him. He wasn't drunk in the reserve. His life in addiction was in the urban centers. It's where he lived most of his adult life, well, on the streets and in jail, and he was becoming a stereotype that most other Canadians would see him as, a drunken Indian. But when he came home, and that's when I visited him, when he was home on the reserve, that was my relationship with him. It wasn't in the city, but it was on the reserve and my grandmother's kitchen or in the living room playing cards, drinking tea, because he was sober, and we would have really wonderful visits. And that's the two different spaces of who he was, this urban Indian man who drank, and then he was also this wonderful, loving uncle and father on the res. The other thing of resolving with this is that I'm putting in some pretty significant, I'm putting medicine in this. And to me, as an artist, doing art is part of my own ceremony. It's something I do for myself in processing a lot of the things I'm working on, not only for myself, but for my children and my family and for my community. You know, it's really important to take care of yourself. And so this is how I'm taking care of myself and processing a lot of these cycles that I'm hoping to break so I don't pass on to the next generation. Adding tobacco to my art piece is very important to me because this is, like I said, this is my ceremony. This is my way of healing, my way of coming up with my own thoughts and also remembering where I come from. I'm going to incorporate the pictorial catechism, the one that they had in Blue Quills Indian Residential School was the Father Lacombe's pictorial catechism. And so it's kind of based on this pictorial catechism where you have the way of evil. You know, if they spoke their language, they would be on this road. If they practiced their culture or traditions, they would be on this road. Of course, the dark road, that's hell. The light road, that's the road to heaven. And throughout the road to evil, you will see that there's native people with bows and arrows, you know, wearing their feathers with their spears in their hand. They just look a little bit more sinister compared to the fair skins on the road to heaven. And this image was throughout Indian residential school rooms so that children were consistently reminded that that was the road they were on, as well as their parents and family and grandparents. It was really powerful. It was a really powerful image for children because they could see it, right? And this is how important art is to, well, not just to me, but for a lot of First Nations people, because it expressed so much in an image. But this is an important part of my childhood too, is my grandmother baptized me. My grandmother who participated in chicken dances, ghost dances, peyote meetings. She loved all cultures, she loved all people, she loved learning, and she went to church all the time, but at the same time, she took what worked from both who she is as an Indigenous person and who she was taught as a good Canadian woman. That to me is how you reconcile, is by learning from both, even the things that hurt you the most. Those painful parts in your life are so integral to your story. And it's good to figure out the systems that oppressed you and why, constantly asking, "Tanige," you know, why? And figuring out it's not religion, it was how religion was beat into children. And so pictorial catechism was one way of mentally, emotionally, and spiritually beating religion into children. And so part of incorporating this into this piece is making that connection that we always have choices. In this case, you know, I'm working on my way to hell. Because I'm learning my language, I'm you know, practicing, you know, I participate in ceremonies. I believe wholeheartedly in our spirituality and prayer and, you know, the collectivity of who we are as Indigenous people. Those are my values. But now I shifted it. So my way to evil is now turned into my way to Pamatswin, the good life, the red road or this sweetgrass road. So being Indigenous can be a beautiful part of our lives again and not an evil part. paints the sky. A lot of my family, when they finished school at Blue Quills, they didn't return home. A lot of them migrated to the cities to find jobs. And I mean, that was the result of sending your children away, is that you broken those family circles, those relationships, that returning home, you know, you had a mother, you had a father, you had siblings, but you didn't know them. And so a lot of family who returned home still lived in isolation and still had to deal with the mental and emotional and spiritual brokenness, woundedness that they endured in Indian residential schools. So my uncle, he was really well known on the streets. He was an incredibly tough guy. He had a tattoo in the middle of his forehead, right between his eyebrows. He had a tattoo of a cross. I wish I had a photograph of him, because he was such a handsome, you know, Cree man. Beautifully chiseled face, very masculine, strong. He was tall, and when he was young, he was built. He spent time in prison, so he worked out a lot. It was, my grandmother called, and she said, you know, my girl, can you go look for your uncle? He hasn't been seen for a couple days. Can you please go and find him? And so I hadn't seen my uncle in years. And so this man was standing at this bus stop, and I'm like, James, stop. I think that's my Uncle George. And he was really sickly. He had, of course, was killing his liver through his drinking. So he kind of looked like this, where his cheekbones just jutted out. His skin was just hanging on his bones, and picked him up, and I brought him to my place. And just like when I was a kid, we played car. I fed him, called my grandmother, and my auntie told him he was with me, and they were going to come get him the next day. And from then on, we played cards till 3 a.m., and that was probably one of the best visits, but it was also the last time I saw him. And he talked about being my grandmother's first son. He inherited a lot of traditional knowledge from her dad, and he also was being the oldest. He learned a lot about the horses from my chop-on Joshua. And then how much he couldn't teach that information because of what residential schools did to him, and because he lived a life on the streets, and because he drank and wasn't living a good life, not living up Bamatswin, that he said I couldn't share this stuff, but now I'm ready to. And he died that following winter. I was trying to capture just the kind of emptiness through silver. I like the reflectiveness of it, the shininess of it, because that's what the city kind of is for a lot of people, is, you know, there's something shiny and exciting about it, but at the same time it carries a lot of, you know, a lot of people can't afford living or handle city living, urban living, well, like my uncle did. Smoothing out the gesso. The gesso is to hold the paint. And of course, you want to make sure your surface is clean. Earlier, when I was like kind of working on the cityscape, I was thinking about how, you know, kids were indoctrinated with the values, this constantly giving these two choices of the way of the evil and the way of good. I only heard of how people in Indian residential schools learned the way of the evil because they had to learn how to lie. because if they told the truth, they would get in trouble and punished. Because the truth of living there for a lot of the children was abuse, living in starvation, seeing murders, learning to hate themselves because they were Native. My inspiration is, some of it is just intuitively. It evolves as you work on it. Just like creating the face, right? I threw it on the ground, have no idea what I'm going to create. But when I start playing with it, there's already a personality coming through it just from the shape. And then I just start carving and playing with it without really, I get zoned out and go into this very deep subconscious conversation with the clay. And when I put the face on this board, the body part of it just came, and then it just hit me to add that dirt, that connection to earth. And I realized that the original dirt I used was from blue quills, and then some of the other dirt that I used from around here is actually from this river valley, which is pretty significant as well, because not too far from here they found burial grounds, right? They found artifacts. And so this was a gathering place for First Nations, to the original peoples of this area. And so that's pretty cool, actually, just realizing that. And so that's the cool thing about this intuitive process, like connecting to spirit, is that there is a whole conversation happening before it even gets to my brain, if I allow spirit to just take over. Through my art, I feel beautiful, I feel powerful, I feel all of that. And I don't know why. I just know it has something to do with that deeper spiritual connection of what's going on and allowing my spirit to guide me. I was thinking about it last night, and then I decided this morning I'll look up the text. I'll look for some text, and I knew I had this book that I was keeping for art purposes. It's part of the artistic process as well, is to destroy and recreate. So every time I create, I essentially am destroying something else. Like, it's the paradox of creation, of being in that chaos. Because I'm constantly recreating myself and my thoughts and evolving. I'm not stuck in one place. I'm surrounding the piece with kind of a ribbon of racist ideologies of First Nations people or Aboriginal people. That whole idea that we were a vanishing race, that they didn't see us surviving genocide and wars and the great changes. So this one says, sentimentalists call them the noble savage. The epigrammatist said, the only good Indian is a dead one. One person called him dirty, another treacherous. And in front of all the commotion, the Indian sat wrapped in his blanket, a bronze enigma. It's just random text from the book that, everything from playing Indians and cowboys, which my uncle was both. He was a cowboy and he was an Indian. They even buried him with his cowboy boots that had so much miles to them. They were pretty broken. I am going to paint over this, this ideology, because I don't want to be stuck there, right? I don't want to think in terms of that oppressive state. I want to take these words and take the power away from them. In the pictorial catechism, one road is to heaven and one road is to hell. But in this setting, I'm leaving it as the urban landscape, that it is hell and it is heaven. This piece kind of reflects a lot of not just my uncle's struggles, but also my own struggles, and having to come to terms with, the making right and wrong decisions, accepting the decisions I did make and learning from them and moving on in a good way. It's based on my uncle, but really it's a lot about me. Our language, is our lifeline to our culture. We're told that we are savage and heathens, and all of this racist ideology that I'm writing on is, I'm writing syllabics from our own laws. And so our laws are about speaking humbly, calming one another, loving one another, helping one another. Silence is part of our values, meditating, praying, determination, all of that which my uncle may have knew about, but trauma trumped our ways. Aga me ye muk, agame muk, which is to be determined, to persevere and trust. Like how you persevere is trust in the Creator, trust in others, trust in yourself. I had people asking about this piece, and so to actually have them come and ask, having a safe place for them to come and ask me questions they always want to ask but were too scared to or whatever. So he's becoming quite a dialogue starter, as well as a symbol of awareness and education. Here I am working on this image of my uncle and honoring him and learning through his life. I'm understanding more about my life. I feel that having this piece really helped me grieve for the past, but also gave me a lot of hope for the future.
Wah hey